Hello everybody and welcome to Psych of Emotion once again. Today we're going to talk about emotion and relationships, and part of the deal with this assignment, with this particular lecture, is it's going to lead to an assignment, but it also should inform on your papers, and that would be 2 papers, emotion and relationships, and probably the paper on empathy. So stay tuned, and we're going to kind of round out your perspective on those and give you something to work with. Obviously, you're going to need to do additional work for your papers beyond what's presented here, but it's a good start. So let's talk about emotion in relationships, and once again, we got a OH. There you go. There you are at home with your IO, for those of you that are home. I hope that the people in your home and your pets don't go, why is that person screaming IO? But we're in Ohio, so they should know. Let us then first begin with this idea that we are social animals, and as such, we're likely to be pretty good at managing our affiliation needs. And we look at affiliation, that is being with someone, as a need that's present in most human beings, present in an awful lot of animal species as well. So let's start with the premise that we're pretty good judges of when we want to be alone or with others. And you might say, well, okay, so what's the evidence for that? And I love this study by O'Connor and Rosenblood. What they did is they gave their participants pagers, beepers. This is a long gone technology. Silly technology when you think about it, because it would go off and it would display a number, and then you have to go find a phone to call that number. Yeah, this is pre-cell phone. That's how we used to do it, right? So what they do is they give their participants a pager, and they give them a little notebook. And notice this could be done with a smartphone quite readily, or an iPad in today's technology. But what happens is the pager goes off about every hour or so, and there's a certain randomness to it. Maybe it's 65 minutes, 70 minutes, maybe it's 45 minutes. And then once the beeper goes off, you've been instructed now, you're out in the real world doing your life, because it's a field experiment. The pager goes off, you open the notebook to the proper page, and it says, are you with someone right now? And you answer the question yes or no. And then there's a second question you answer, which is, do you want to be with someone right now, yes or no? And what happens is it becomes a longitudinal field study. So as we move along, what we can do, what O'Connor and Rosenblood did was, okay, so at time 1, the person states whether they're with someone or not, and then they state whether they would like to be with someone or not. And now we can go to time 2 and see what their affiliation state is. Does it match the affiliation, the desired affiliation state in the previous entry? And what they found is about 66% of the time, about 2/3 of the time, people were in the affiliation state that they wanted to be in, that they'd predicted just about an hour before. So let's take that as evidence as we understand whether we want to be with people or not, and we're pretty good at fulfilling that need as desired. So we have pretty good naive theories about our emotional states and affiliation needs. And naive theory is an interesting term. It's not a derogatory term. What it means is it's not empirically supported. So the theory we generate within psychological science, right, is empirically supported, so we call it empirical theory. Naive theory is our day-to-day theory that we develop through our life experience. It's not bad. Sometimes it's pretty damn good, but it lacks empirical support. And most naive theory can be put to an empirical test if we so desire. And let's look at the empirical tests that have been generated in this regard. Affiliation and fear. So what do you think is the relationship between affiliation and fear? As someone becomes more fearful, let's state this as a theoretical construct, as fear goes up, then the affiliation desire goes... Well, your naive theory might say it goes up. So they put it to a test. They brought people into the laboratory, and this is one of those crazy social psychological experiments that takes place in the waiting room. You don't even have to wait to get in the laboratory. You sit down, and there's a confederate, right? And the confederate is sitting there, but they're pretending to be a participant. You're a participant, and you're told, as you're signing your release form, that this experiment may then include painful electrical shocks. And then they say, after you fill out the paperwork and you're warned, you go sit down. And what they're going to do is measure how much you talk to the other person sitting in the waiting room. Now, that was the experimental condition. The control condition is no mention of painful electrical shocks, right? Just a standard release form. So what we see is the people who anticipated being shocked chatted up the Confederate more than those who were in the control condition and weren't in the fear condition. So Schachter comes along and says, well, look, fear leads to the desire to affiliate. And this is one of those weird things where we have researchers who are going to go, hey, I know what makes people want to affiliate. I know what makes people want to affiliate. And everyone's going to take their own individual study as evidence for the greater picture. Now, affiliation and embarrassment started off in Zimbardo, and you know Zimbardo. Right, Zimbardo, Stanford Prison Experiment, etc. Zimbardo wrote the book on shyness, just in case you're interested. Way back in the day, that was one of his primary research interests. So affiliation and embarrassment, what is your prediction there? As an embarrassing situation increases, do you desire to affiliate more or less? And let's face it, the answer is probably less. So what does that mean? Well, interestingly then, how do you test this in the laboratory? Well, you give some participants who interact within the laboratory setting a binky. That is, they have to put a pacifier in their mouth. And then you watch how much they interact with others. And what we find is in the binky condition versus the control condition, of course, people want to affiliate less because they were under the influence of embarrassment. So embarrassment leads to a desire to affiliate less. There you go. Isn't that fascinating? Okay. What else? Well, as we start piling up these studies that look at individual emotions and their predicted relationship to affiliation, what do we learn? What do we find out? Well, someone comes along, Rolf comes along, and he says, what's so behind this? What's the big picture? What's the process or mechanism at work overall? And what we find is Rolf suggests that we are good at understanding, will it be useful for me to affiliate or not under my current emotional state? So it really is the utility, the expected utility of the interaction, the affiliation. Will it enhance my emotional state? Or will it make me uncomfortable? And that really is the dividing line. So now, once we have the big picture, we can take almost any emotion and any kind of affiliation desire and predict relatively successfully whether it will happen, whether affiliation will increase or not based on the expected utility. So occasionally there's someone, a scientist, who comes along, stands back, looks at all the research, and then makes a more global statement about it. And Rolf took that part in this. Now, let's talk about anxiety and arousal and the typical misattribution paradigm. Now, we talked about misattribution way back with Schachter and Singer and getting that shot of norepinephrine, right? Getting the shot of epinephrine, and then people attributing that to arousal or not. In this case, fear is an arousal emotion. But we think that love, right, requires a certain level of arousal. Now, romantic, passionate love, if you will, right? And so, but is it possible that someone could become aroused by a fearful stimulus, but be in the presence of someone else, and then mistake that arousal for attraction to the person they're with? Well, how do you test this? And Dutton and Aaron did a field study, and it's a pretty cool field study. Now, this isn't the actual bridge, but it'll give you the idea. How many of you would feel confident about walking across that bridge, or how many of you might get really scared, break out into sweat, have it change your breathing, etc., all those sympathetic nervous system reactions? Well, the idea is you walk across this rickety bridge, it scares the hell out of you, and what's at the other end of the bridge? Well, Dutton and Aaron have an attractive female research assistant standing there to greet men who cross the bridge. And as a man crosses the bridge, she says, "Hey, how are you? We are conducting a study. We're doing experiments and we're recruiting participants. If you're interested, would you please call this number?" And she hands them a card. Well, you know what the dependent measure is how many times does this number get dialed in the fear condition. Now, we need a control condition, right, to compare the effect. So, there's our attractive research assistant. Let's put her at the end of the bridge. She's handing out the cards. You go, Vanna, right? But now, in the control condition, we choose a different bridge. And this is another bridge in Washington State. the idea is that you walk across this bridge, it shouldn't evoke much fear. It's a solid bridge, it's got a pedestrian lane, it's all good. So half the time our assistant stands at the end of the rickety bridge, the other half the time she moves on over to the solid bridge, she's handing out the cards, it's a simple comparison. What's your prediction? Does she get more calls from the men who went across the solid bridge, or more calls about from the guys that went across the rickety bridge? And what do we find? Well, the rickety bridge wins the day in this regard. So, evidence, empirical evidence that we can become anxious, we can become aroused, and then mistake it for kind of the pitter-patter of the heart that is thought to typify romantic love, right? That increased heartbeat, the sweaty palms, all those little features of romantic arousal. So what do we know then? Well, from this, we can surmise that maybe passionate love, the thrill of it, it's the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. So theorists come along and they say, look, passionate love requires a state of heightened physiological arousal. That is, there are biological changes that occur within my body when I'm in the presence of the target of my affection, right? But it's necessary that that arousal, right, is triggered by the beloved person, that thought comes into mind, and that's kind of the appraisal process. So it's kind of like a stress reaction. We say, oh my God, my heartbeat is activated, my breathing is different, my palms are sweating, and then I search for a reason for these changes in my physiology, and here it is, this person that I might be attracted to, and I say, oh my God, it must be because of them, right? So sometimes we can misattribute physiological arousal to passionate love is the kind of end state of all this conversation. And the process has a fancy-ass name. It's called excitation transfer. And if you're interested, I think Zillman is the first person to coin this term, right? And that is the excitation from this stimulus is being transferred to another stimulus in a mistaken fashion. So excitation transfer. Questions? All right, let's move on and let's look at something a little different. This is an interesting study, and notice that when we talk relationships, much of the research that we're going to refer to is really done kind of old school heterosexual relationships. So homosexual relationships, I think that there's going to be little that differs in regard to those, but it's yet to be empirically verified across. So there's an opportunity to replicate a lot of these studies, right, that were conducted with heterosexual participants and replicate them with homosexual participants, right, and just kind of flip the system around and see if the results are the same. For me, and this is my opinion, I would expect to see virtually no difference in the results. Relationships, right? But leave that to other people to kind of untangle empirically. In this case, so we're talking heterosexual in this case, and what we're looking at, how does it feel to see a perfect 10? And when I say a perfect 10, you know what I'm saying. Oh, the scale of 1 to 10 rating people on attractiveness. Not that any of us do that, but I'm sure we're all culturally familiar with the idea. So what we do is, in this experiment, we measure a person's mood. That's going to be the dependent variable. And notice, this lecture is also kind of a lead-in to any of you doing the research in emotion paper. I'm going to talk a lot of research as we move through this.